So greetings, welcome to today's educational program, part 2 of our 12-part lecture series on Managing for Quality, Leading Transformation, Managing Improvement by Dr. Greg Watson. This is your moderator, Doug Wood, with ASQ's Quality Management Division. Today we have the distinct pleasure of hearing from Dr. Gregory H. Watson. We want to welcome him to our talk. Dr. Watson has degrees in management, law, and industrial engineering. He's an 18-year ASQ Fellow and past chair of 2000. He received the ASQ Distinguished Service Medal plus the Lancaster, Crosby, and Ishikawa medals. He's been named an honorary member by 17 national quality associations. Dr. Watson delivered speeches to 20 or more ASQ national and divisional conferences. A former quality executive with Hewlett-Packard, Compaq Computer, and Xerox. He's coached executives in quality transformations at Nokia, Toshiba, ExxonMobil, and over 20 other companies. He's the only Westerner to be awarded a Deming Medal by JUSC, the W. Edwards Deming Medal Award for Dissemination and Promotion overseas in 2009. So without any more work here, let's just introduce Dr. Watson. Greg, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Doug. Tonight we're going to talk about this topic of leading transformation and managing improvement. And this sort of falls into the general category of change management. Today we are thinking about change more and more often. It's becoming a more common topic among quality professionals. So what do we actually mean by this? Well, when I think about what we're talking about, one of the things we would like to have is think about stability in processes. That's what quality has always been working towards. However, stability is an unnatural state of existence. It takes unnatural acts to achieve stability because in almost all cases what we see is the effect of entropy or degradation in systems. As a matter of fact, Einstein said, insanity is doing what you've always done and expecting a different result. When I was young, I remember a comedian, a black woman named Moms Mabley, and she had this little song, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. And so that means we shouldn't do things the same old way. We should have a new way of thinking about them. When I was working at Hewlett-Packard in the 80s, we had a program that was established by the CEO, John Young, called 10X Improvements. And he said he wanted to challenge the company in the decade of the 80s to decrease the quality defect rates by 10X. And what that meant was he chose a magnitude that was something you couldn't just finesse. Almost all managers can maybe change a process by 3 or 5%. But at 10X over a decade, that's 22% annual compound improvement that that organization is doing. And so across all of Hewlett-Packard, signs started showing up. The sign was basically saying, we can't do things the same old way. And it was a pig illustrated by the do not. So no pigs, no female sows. That meant don't do things the same old way. Either we manage change or we change management. But we weren't going to change management. So the idea was, what do we do to manage change? And so we started off with a Japanese approach. And in this, we had to cope with the first ideas. What do we want? Do we want growth or do we want development? Several years ago, I wrote an article called "Breaking from the Pack" in quality management, quality progress. And in that was the eulogy for Russ Ackoff. And Russ Ackoff had always given sort of a juxtaposition between these two. And he talks about growth as being more of the same, increasing in capacity or in volume. So growth means getting bigger. I have a grandson who's now 9 months old. And if he was just getting bigger, at the very beginning, that's enough. But what do we want out of a grandson? I want development. I want something not just more, but somehow different, increasing in capability or competence. This is what we think. And so now he's starting to walk. He can stand up on his own, hold himself up. But when he was a child, he couldn't. That's what we mean by development. So we want, yes, growth, but we'd rather have development. We'd rather have this idea of becoming better. And so management tends to focus on change. What can we do differently? How do we actually structure things in different ways? How can we move things around? How do we create change? Remember John Young also back in the 1980s. He was also a winner of the Ishikawa Medal, by the way, from ASQ. And in his statements about change, he made a comment. And he says, if you don't like change, don't be in the electronics industry, be in the beer industry. Because in the beer industry, we hold the master brewer responsible for keeping the beer tasting the same. But what do we see today? There's so many different types of beers available that every little brewery can pop up in a restaurant even. The next thing you know, it's like all the different varieties, so it's no longer holding things the same, it's giving different value to the customers. And so as we take a look at this, we see there is a Japanese aphorism for change. And it says PDCA, and you've all heard this before because this is the foundation of modern quality thinking. But what it really means, according to Dr. Kano, somewhat jokingly, is please don't change again. Many of you might feel like you're victims of change in your organization. And what that means is that change keeps coming, and it's coming so fast we feel overwhelmed. We don't know what to do. Should we get rid of old ways of doing things? Do we embrace new ways? Is this actually change for the better, or is it change for the worse? When we look at history, we have to see what would we like to have. And so we see there's two ideas that would come sort of related to each other. So do we want change, doing things differently where they were done? So in that case, management must say, keep making changes, do things differently. Or do we want improvement, doing things better than they were done before? And so this challenge is a challenge that we can see going back into the historical ways of looking at things. So when we talk about this topic, leading transformation, managing improvement, we can see that it goes all the way back to the Greek philosopher Heraclitus in the Western tradition. Heraclitus said some 600 years before Christ, everything exists in a state of change. You can't step into the same river twice, was the way he illustrated it. And so we start seeing if everything is changing, how do we cope with that? In China, in the Eastern tradition, we see the I Ching, the Book of Changes. And there they note that change is either auspicious, of good luck, or inauspicious, of bad luck. And so we see we have a choice in change. Which do we want, change for the better or change for the worse? In Japan, we see the term kaizen, which we have all become familiar with. This is the way of improving, and it means literally change for the better. So how do we change for the better? What do we need to do to make that happen? Well, change management applies a structured approach to transition. An organization that's moving from a current state to some desired state, and it has the capability in that desired state of achieving the purposeful benefits. In other words, we set the goal, we have measures for that goal, and in that process, we can achieve that goal. Managing change for the better, however, says we're only focusing on the top side of this, not the degradation of change. So what we see is there are three different ways to make change for the better: continual improvement, breakthrough, or transformation, and each of which can help to create a future state. Each of these approaches is designed to integrate managerial structure, the system capability, as well as the human competence to manage the transition and also to mitigate or eliminate or avoid unintended or negative consequences about that change. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at these three components of change in terms of how to make change for the better. So the first, we want to understand the nature of continual improvement. What is it that we talk about when we talk about continual improvement? Well, job one is managing strategy by leading change. This is the job of the management team. And so we start seeing there's three approaches by which change can be done. And we can use the analogy of strategic thinking in terms of how it's developed in a military sense. There are three levels that we see in terms of how strategy is developed. The first at the highest level is called grand strategy. And grand strategy is achieving and understanding the overall direction we're trying to deal with things. And so here we see in organizations, this means obtaining the resources we need, understanding what are the choices. So we're obtaining and deploying resources to achieve some sort of capability that we'd like the organization to have. The second level of strategy is called operational art, and that's where we're positioning the resources. So if we take a look in a governmental organization, we're talking about strategy, we are getting the ships, we're getting the tanks, we're getting the weapon systems that are necessary, the missiles, whatever they are, and then we are giving them to the military. Operational art then is how do we deploy them to engage a battle? It's just about how do we put those weapon systems into the hands of troops that are going to go and do things, or naval forces. The third level, though, is tactical operations. And this is where we're specifically taking action and deploying those methods and tools to achieve a strategy of improvement. And so here we're starting to say, here's how the battlefield will actually operate and what we're going to deal with. And then at the very base, we see the people doing the basic work. And it's only at that level that we can actually see what is happening in the real world of the engagement. So these three have to operate as a system. If something falls down, we don't get the right grand strategy. It doesn't matter how good we are thinking about operational art or operational tactics. We have an inferior system and we cannot compete. If we have a great operational or grand strategy and we get the right resources, but we don't know how to deploy them, we create weaknesses in the organization. And if we have grand strategy and operational art, but the people are untrained or incompetent, we see also that we have weakness, all of which can lead to destruction and loss. So these three mechanisms are actually creating a means for deploying change. So grand strategy is converting financial resources from investor customers to working resources that enable operations of daily management, so it provides value for the consuming customer. We see there are two different customers. One customer is the person who is providing the resources, this is the investor, or maybe it's a government for a non-commercial organization, or maybe it's a group of members for an association, a professional association, and they're producing value for the consuming customer. So the consuming customer is the customer who's buying, or maybe it is the person who is a citizen in a nation, or maybe it's a person who's a member of a professional association. Operational art is deploying or allocating resources to create operational capability, which may be coordinated to assure that the quality occurs in the outcome of the daily management. This is how we're getting the flow right for the organization. How do we actually achieve the things we need to do? Operational tactics, then, is applying work procedures to tactically coordinate the predictably good results we have while preventing occurrences of failure at the point of delivery, the touch point, if you will, to that external customer. And so we're delivering products and services, and we have to make sure that this is done in a flawless manner. That's what's happening in the daily management system. And so we see change must be deployed into the daily management system of an organization. Well, the daily management system, we tend to think of using a Japanese word, gemba. And we have co-opted this word into the Western tradition. It's the Romaji term that comes from the Japanese characters. And the reason we find this word helpful is Aristotle said, excellence is a result of habit. What is habit? It's doing routine work in the best possible way consistently over time. That's what happens in daily management. Now, to understand Gemba, we have to pull apart these kanji characters, because the meaning actually becomes derived from the original sense of these characters that were adopted by Japan in the 1600s from the Chinese terms. So what are the four meanings behind this? There's four components to this character. We see one component is the king, another one is sunset, excuse me. Another one is doing an audit or a survey, and finally is seeing a pigsty. So we can make some sense out of this if we use the 5 W1H questions. What happened? Well, a survey was being conducted, a detailed scrutiny of what's happening. Who was there? The king, implying that this is an executive function. When did it happen? At sunset, the end of the working day. Where did it happen? the king went to the point where the work was being done. Why did it happen? To understand the real thing. What happened today? And how did it happen? It was personal activity of the king to notice. And what he saw was a pigsty. He saw the waste. He saw the loss. He saw the mess in the system. So, key lesson in this is transforming organizations requires executives study their Gemba and initiate actions that will make it better. So, what do? Well, Taiichi Ohno said the Gemba concept really is not just limited to a production operation. He said you can view office work with the same as a production floor where we make things. You can have the Gemba philosophy for administrative work by identifying your administrative Gemba. And in saying this, he's pointing out that we tend to make very big distinctions between how you manage and supervise the blue-collar worker in a production environment, or the person who is directly delivering service to a customer in a hotel or a restaurant, and the white-collar worker. We think that the white-collar worker doesn't need supervision because their work is kind of invisible. It's the knowledge worker that Peter Drucker talked about. However, white-collar workers tend to get rotated out of their position. We change jobs every 2, maybe 3 years. And we see that nobody's really supervising directly what we do on a day-to-day basis. And after a few years where we do one thing, we move to another position to broaden our capability as a manager or to broaden our work experience. And we see that nobody really checks the work that was done. And when we come into a new position, what do? We say, can I plan a new plan for what I'm going to do in this position? And we tend to ignore the past. And by doing this, we lose the connectivity that allows continual improvement. So, how does this 3-level Gemba model actually work? Well, we're going to come back and say, there is a pragmatic model we can talk about, this structure where we have Gemba 1, Gemba 2, and Gemba 3. And we can start seeing that just as we talked about the strategic changes, there is a parallel to how we manage those organizations across those 3 levels of strategy or strategic input. So strategic change is creating improvement, and it happens within an organization and across the functions of the organization. So is internal change the same as external change? Do we view it the same way, or is it different? So if we're going to have change in an organization, comprehensive change must be integrated across the whole organization. We change internally to create change for the external audience, the customers and the investors that drive our performance. And so we see that change becomes, in continual improvement, a never-ending story. We have a baseline which we measure, and then we have repetitive cycles of improvement happening. So we have improvement followed by standardization, and then we improve on that standard to create a new standard, and then we improve on that standard to create a new standard. And so we see standard work is never settled knowledge. Standard work always keeps improving as we see new ways of doing things better. And by doing this, we achieve constancy of purpose. The purpose is to deliver ever-increasing value to our customers. And so that means we are constantly seeking a better way to work. So continual improvement is a structured approach to management. We're not just randomly choosing a change here and a change there, but we want to make sure these really do apply a constant effort to improve performance. And we have to do that by repetitive learning cycles. We have this integrated standardized do check act. So we're working on work standards of daily management. And when the workers can no longer make that improvement, we have to do a system change, plan do check act. And by doing these together, we actually have a process to achieve change, applying both incremental and breakthrough projects to make change happen so the customers serve better. So the first order of change we're going to talk about is continual improvement. And I tend to think of this as what I call a work changer. It's process oriented. This is the evolutionary incremental improvement of work and deliverables by reducing lags, leaks, and friction. So those terms come from Thorsten Veblen, an economist in the late 1800s, who was one of the ones who discussed this difference between the leisure class of the capitalists and the worker class, which is most of society. And they said, he said, what we have to do is make sure that we eliminate these three things: lags, differences in time that don't make sense; leaks, losses of material or value in the system; friction that occurs from constraints. And these are the three things that cause waste or inefficiency. And that results then in ultimate financial loss to the organization, to its customers, society. So we start seeing continual improvement is going to try to prevent this state from occurring. Now, when the first author to talk about the term continual improvement was actually Henri Fayol, and he wrote the General and Industrial Management in 1916. And he said, managing requires a constant search for improvements that can be introduced into every sphere of activity. So do we do this as an event, or is this a continual part of how we do things? Searching for things, reflecting, can we do it better? And so this is part of what we see as what he calls managing. And he says the search for improvement should be pursued unceasingly at all levels, Gemba 1, Gemba 2, Gemba 3, and throughout all parts of the business. So that means it's not just production, it's also administrative Gemba. It's also the governance Gemba. The executive in charge should have an active, unrelenting intent to effect improvement. Now, what that means is continual improvement is a marathon. We just don't give it up. We have to have this constant intent to pursue material improvements. That means improvements that make a difference, not just in the materials, but that deliver substantial improvement to the organizations. Because it occurs at all levels, workers also must be alert to discover better ways of doing their work. So it applies equally to the executive level as it does to the worker level. Both Gembas need to be engaged. In all aspects of work, we see lags, leaks, and friction that create waste and inefficiency must be eliminated, thereby reducing the cost of work transactions. So this is what we talk about, excuse me, when we talk about continual improvements. Just let me have a little sip of my coffee here and maybe my throat will be better. So while you all are having your evening, I'm having my late night, post-midnight, to do this from Finland. So in part 2, we want to understand the nature of breakthrough. And we think of breakthrough, the person that I relate it to mostly is the person who created that term, and that was Dr. Joseph Juran. In 1964, his book, Breakthrough Management, came as what the Japanese said, a breath of fresh air. When he talked about this, it was the first time that managers heard that there was something that they could do that was not just statistical process control. So Deming's works and lectures in Japan were mostly about statistical methods. And the Japanese managers felt very constrained by this. But when Juran talked about breakthrough, he said it's disruptive change in an organization's infrastructure, technology, or market that causes a step function change in performance. The Japanese said, aha, something that we can do, not just the workers. And so they embraced his concept of breakthrough. And we can look at this as the beginning of the development of the concept of Hoshin-Kanri, or strategic management by policy, which is the Japanese approach for managing strategy, defining and managing strategy in an organization. And that really began in the mid-1960s, stimulated by Joseph Juran. So what did Juran have to say about this idea of breakthrough? Well, he said there can be either incremental or evolutionary continual improvements, or breakthrough revolutionary improvement. So the incremental are the small steps that occur one step at a time, slow, steady progress, low cost, low risk, low complexity, low effort. And that's what we see happening mostly in the workplace. And that's what we see is happening in Gemba 1 very clearly. We think of this today as Kaizen or lean methods and how they're applying. Typically, they're done by frontline workers working on their own process. And this is then an ongoing, relentless effort to drive improvement, and that should be happening in every business area, according to Duran. On the other hand, breakthrough or revolutionary improvement is happening one project at a time. And Duran said that this type of improvement only happens by projects. So projects then are targeted at making a step function change, all at one period of time. These tend to be major and even cross-functional types of activities. Projects can be formally designated by management and assigned a full-time project owner, manager. And so that person then is responsible for delivering the project results. And projects tend to be facilitating using some new generation of technology, whether we're talking about a dedicated software system such as SAP, or we're talking about deployment of a structured problem-solving method like the MAIC or Japanese total quality management. All of those are technologies that are applied into an organization to make the change happen. So change of the second order is breakthrough change. And I think of this as a technology changer. It is oriented not towards a process, but towards the system or the linkage together of processes. And we see this as a step function change in work performance that's occurring because we're introducing technological change in product, service, or processes. And that is what's giving us this increased capability or capacity in the productive system. So that productive system can be producing for manufacturing or producing for services. And that results in enhanced competence of the individuals who are then delivering that productive output. So we see we're making a change to processes, technologies, and people to drive a breakthrough, a step function change in the organization. So what occurs? This is not occurring by chance. This type of change is being directed. And so we see that breakthrough is there's an important discovery that answers a persistent problem, addresses a chronic issue in the organization. It's an activity that extends key performance capabilities to lessons well beyond what we were able to do in the current state before we implemented that change. And it acts by removing constraints or obstacles that lie in the path of achieving our vision and the goal that we associate with that vision. And so when we're talking about this, we speak about technology. And what do we actually mean by technology? So we can have, indeed, technological change. This is a system-wide performance where we have drastically improvement in equipment like automation or material handling equipment, maybe software, dedicated production support systems, and so forth. We can also have a production process change. We're transforming the flow of business through some sort of work process, implementing Kanban, Hijunka, or some sort of major change, or a change in the operating business model that addresses customers or markets in an innovative way, either opening new markets or creating new products. And finally, it could be a workforce competence change, enabling new ways of thinking or operating that supports these techno shifts. And this is the development of competence in people to deal with digitization, nanotechnology, or robotics. And so breakthrough is actually shifting our way of working. It's applying technologies to fundamentally reimagine how we work and then adjusting our work to fit that reimagination. The third component that we think about here is understanding the nature of transformation. And so when we talk about transformation, we think about how transformation operates. The most normal illustration we have is of the caterpillar that converts into the butterfly. And we tend to use this as we talk about digital transformation today, which is one of the more increasingly discussed topics among executive suites and has been in the quality community for the last 3 years, where we've been talking about quality 4.0 and how do we respond to digital transformation. The transformation changes systems, and it changes the way that people work in those systems. So this is change of the third order. And instead of talking about a work changer, instead of talking about a system changer, we're going to talk about a game changer. Because this isn't about processes or systems, it's about defining how the whole culture works in a different area. So this is disruptive change. And it occurs because we're going to shift the position of our organization in terms of the intent, purpose, or culture of our organization, or the mindset of the individual employees in that organization in ways that will fundamentally and dramatically alter the way that the effectiveness is delivered and the way that that organization is competing in its environment. Now, Deming, interestingly, was the person who focused us on transformation. In the New Economics in 1992, reissued after his death in 1994 by his daughter, he had some statements about transformation around the concept he called the system of profound knowledge. And he said, understanding of profound knowledge will lead to transformation of management. The transformation will lead to adoption of what we have learned to call a system with a stated aim. So he's thinking about purposeful systems. Transformation in any organization will take place under a leader. It will not be spontaneous. In other words, it must be leadership-directed project change. The job of a leader is to accomplish transformation of his organization. He possesses knowledge, personality, and persuasive power. And so we see that in this transformation concept, that the leader must direct that activity because they understand how the whole organization works. By the power of their personality and their ability to persuade, they can engage the whole organization in making that transformation. And just as many people who focus on change management talk about communication as a critical ingredient, we see that, yes, for the leader, it is absolutely essential. To accomplish transformation, a leader also understands what would bring gains to the organization and is compelled to accomplish the transformation as an obligation to himself. In other words, that transformation becomes the essence of the role of the leader in guiding change and leading it to this new generation. So what is transformative change? Well, transformative change creates the future operating system of the organization and the system that needs to address its future challenges. It's a designed approach. It creates a culture and a systems of operation that will deliver performance required in the future state. So the leader must gain some insight into what is that future desired state and be able to articulate that vision and establish a goal that is how people will collaborate together to make that happen. So we see effective transformation is indeed an executive job. The role of the executive function is to establish meaning, significance, and urgency of those forces driving the transformation. They must communicate clearly the strategy as well as the rationale driving this need for transformation. And most importantly, perhaps, they must act as a role model of the desired set of behaviors required as a result of the change. In my second job after Hewlett-Packard, or my first job after Hewlett-Packard, actually, I was at Compaq Computer and Director of Corporate Quality. And I had the privilege to work for Rod Canyon. And when Compaq was founded, Jim Harris, Bill Murtaugh, and Rod Canyon were all employees of Texas Instruments. And the first thing they decided on, what was the culture or the way they wanted to work? They didn't like the way they'd been working before. And what they wanted to do is establish what are the principles upon which our new company can operate. Now, they decided this before they decided what the company would do. And I think that's interesting. So this company, they said, would have first putting the customer first. Always the customer would be the first consideration. The second thing is that they would manage in teams. Those teams would manage by fact, and they would come to consensus judgments to work for achievement. And those 5 ingredients formulated the culture of Compaq. They allowed it to become the fastest company to make $100 million in a year, fastest to the Fortune 500, fastest to the Fortune 100. And they had the record for the compound annual growth of any company up until the mid-1980s. They were later replaced by Nokia. Now, interestingly enough, Rod could make all the decisions. He had the majority share of the stocks in the company, and when the decisions were made about products and so forth, he was the one to drive them. And in the late 1980s, he was embarrassed because he didn't have a Compaq laptop computer. Compaq made portable computers, luggable, half the weight of a portable computer before that, but not the laptop version. And to get the computer to the size of the laptop version, they needed to use Japanese integrated circuits. Those integrated circuits had a extra tax added to them because the Commerce Department had declared the Japanese were dumping. So they were not actually cost effective to put in computers. As a matter of fact, Compaq couldn't even make a computer at the price that Toshiba was selling them in the United States. And so Rod, in 1987, said, we have to make a laptop computer. I'm tired of being embarrassed because I don't have a laptop. And so he turned to Lori Strong, the vice president of marketing, and asked her, said, Lori, please do the business case for the laptop computer. I think the time has come to make it. Lori discovered in that process that IBM was trying to teach a lesson to Intel, that IBM was controlling the personal computer business. Intel's chips were not the controllers. And so when Intel came out with a 386 chip, IBM said they wouldn't release it, that they wouldn't put it into their computers, that the 286 had not actually seen its useful market life. However, when Lori discovered this, she worked up two business cases. One for the first case of beating IBM to the desktop market with a 386, and the case that Rod asked her to make a 286 portable computer. And so when the numbers came in, Compaq would double its revenue if it beat IBM with a 386 chip. And if it made the laptop computer, it would be flat or maybe even a loss because it was not a competitive model. And I asked Rod about this decision. He said, you know, I had a choice at that point in time. If I chose the 386, I met all 5 ingredients of our decision process and our culture. We put the customer first. We made the decision based on teamwork. It was a consensus decision. We were managing by fact, and we had achievement. However, I would violate every one of those if I went for the laptop computer. I would put myself ahead of the customer. I would be the team. It was not going to be a consensus decision. It was not going to be based on fact. And oh, by the way, it wouldn't achieve achievement. And in so doing, he said, if I made that choice, I would have totally destroyed the culture of the organization. What this means is he would have given permission to every other manager to make similar choices based on their own rationale rather than the rationale that set Compaq apart. So, what is the job of the executive? It's to be the role model. It's to be the leader in that transformation process. What's the role of the quality executive or the quality professional who's a trusted advisor? Well, the role we have is to coach the executives in the actions they need and how to take and accomplish that role in the transformation. We have to facilitate integration of transformation activities across the levels of the organization and across its functions. And we have to support the change management teams in their improvement activities. When they need support, coaching and tools or methods, we have to be able to provide that so that they actually can focus on what they need to be experts on in delivering the content of the process. So we come now to our 4th section of the presentation tonight. And here what we're going to talk about is understanding the roles of management and leadership. So we see systemic change actually comes from design to improvement. And whether we're saying God has made the design in the first stage of the butterfly, or we move the butterfly into a digital age, we are going beyond just change. And at each level of change, the operating system is different. The caterpillar, the larva, the butterfly, we start seeing that change is happening in that system. And when we're managing change projects internally, we see one perspective of change. But from an external perspective, it's different. So in Gemba 1, the daily management system of the work process, we see continual improvement. We see the reflective process, plan, do, check, understand what we need to do next, reflect, and how do we make it for the better. And then we plan, do, check, act. And then we do the process all over again. The do is the accomplishment of the work in the process. And that's where we should spend 80% of our time developing value. Gemba 2 is about breakthrough. This is about those things that are beyond the resources we budgeted to Gemba 1, beyond the decision rights that we have allocated to the decision makers in Gemba 1, and this then becomes those change projects of the organization. Gemba 3 is about transformation. And this is about the cultural change of our ways of working and the ways of doing things. And so from the inside, we see each of those as a different level of Gemba with different time frames, different activities, and perhaps even different processes. But to the outside, they can't see those projects. We're like a black box to them. What the outside says is, here is an organization that is going through a continuous state of improvement. So collective activity coordinated across the levels and across the functions of the organization enables comprehensive change. So what's actually happening here? Well, we can see each of these Gemba is doing a different thing. And so we're managing across these Gemba, and we're managing different natures and structures or quality characteristics at each level of the Gemba. So if we go to Gemba 1, we see that the customer focus is on the workers. The next process is my customer. And so the objective is work productivity, keep the flow going, maintain the consistency. The dominant function is going to be performing the work, operating the process. The performance function is on flow efficiency. Are we getting the flow right? The performance approach is by working on quality and working on efficiency, getting rid of waste in that system. And the quality mindset is, let's get it right the first time so that we don't have any waste or rework in the system. And the team approach we have here is the work group, a quality circle, the intact team that's actually doing work in that step in the process. When we move to Gemba 2, we see there's a different set of conditions. Here the quality characteristics have shifted. Now we focus not on the next process step, but we're focusing on the external customer, the customer who is paying for what we get. Here the work objectives is work priority. Are we getting the things to the customers in the order in which we need to as an organization for the demand of the customers? The dominant function then is supervising and managing to make sure that the lower level processes are coordinated to achieve those priority issues. And we see that the performance is not just growth, but it's productive growth, growth that is enabling the system to perform. So growth for itself here is actually not growth, it's really a part of development. But it's to have productive profitability, profitable growth. And so the objective mindset here for quality is serve the customer. And we do this by having programs or projects. This is where we take the leadership. How do we coordinate and apply the right decision or the decision rights that people need to have in Gemba 1? How do we give the resources to Gemba 1 that they need to have to be able to make that improvement process happen? And by doing this, we create step function change, because what we have done is we have coordinated the leaps across those functional boundaries. Where are the problems in most organizations? It's not usually within functions. It's probably most likely going to be an activity where we have a discontinuity between the functions. And we start seeing that like the old comic strip, Pogo. I have met the enemy and they is us. We fight marketing, we fight research, we fight production, but we don't fight. We're not fighting our external customer by doing that. We're fighting each other. So we haven't actually had a consistent internal process for working. If we look at Gemba 3, though, we start seeing now the customer focus is the owners. Here, it's the profitability of our work. We see the dominant function is command and control. How do we give those goals? How do we give that vision? And we start seeing the flow performance is not on flow efficiency, it's on resource efficiency. Have we invested more in our business than we need to? Have we not, and have we invested properly in our business in the right areas? Are we investing in working smarter, not just working harder? And so the performance objective is financial growth. Are we delivering the numbers that our customers and the ownership level or the government who has given us budget, are we delivering the performance that they expect? And then so the quality mindset, are we getting the business results? And so we see that this team approach is there's a steering committee or there's an executive council. And all three of these different teams in Toyota, it's called Jisuiken. So Jisuiken are teams working for the better. And those teams apply at all levels of the organization to do this. So if we put this whole system together, it's a system of change projects that's appearing. From an external point of view to the customer, that is continuous improvement. From an internal point of view, it's continual improvement in the work process. It's breakthrough improvement across the work processes, and it's transformation of the organization as a whole. So how do we do this? We will go more and more into this concept as we have further lectures. But basically, the very first time we're working on a process, Taiichi Ohno says, when you first study it, create a standard. He says it doesn't have to be a very good standard, but it has to be a standard. As a matter of fact, it's probably to your advantage if it isn't very good. Then the workers will say, that's not exactly what we have to do. And they will take on this desire after they've created that standard to then improve the standard. So we see the first iteration of doing standardized do, check, act is actually about understanding the work. The second iteration, now that we understand it, we're able to actually document what is the work that we're doing. And when we have a documented work standard, we then have the basis from which to simplify the work. And this is what we call the process in building a daily management system. So it doesn't start necessarily by just going out and doing a Kaizen project. It starts by studying. It starts by understanding the system, by learning what are we doing, and then saying, where should we be actually making improvements happen? What are the wastes that we have in a process? How do we work towards eliminating them? And then how do we show that we are actually making substantial improvement? We have to have a baseline. We have to have a standard. As Duran said, without a standard, there can be no improvement. And then we can start simplifying and going through that process. So this is the fundamental approach that we do. We have to learn to design our business as a system and to drive those improvements in a systematic way. So what we start seeing is we need a portfolio of change projects. So we see at the work process level, we have to have emphasis on the deliverables of the organization. Those are continual improvement projects. Maybe we call them Kaizen, or we call them lean thinking. At the system level, we have to have some sort of breakthrough improvement projects across the business areas and within the business areas, and those are project focused. At the governance level of the organization, leadership must take us on a transformation journey. And together, this is managing a continuous state of structural change. So managers improve processes, leaders improve systems. Now, there are no easy solutions. So the takeaway is you can't add butter to a housefly to create a butterfly. Designing change into DNA of an organization is necessary, and that is the role of a leadership. So we have to design our way to the future of quality. We have to be able to create an inclusive business system where change is managed at all three levels in a coordinated way to deliver on the vision and achieve the goals of our organization. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Greg. So at this point, we are going to begin taking questions from our audience. I want to thank Greg for speaking with us, and we'll move into the Q&A section now.